I'm gonna switch it up.
And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our MPF webinar for the month of November. This is our 32nd edition. And with me, as usual, Uri, I think 100% participation is Uri Gutfreund. Uri, how you doing?
I'm great, John. How are you?
I'm fantastic. We were in New York last week with a room full of managing partners and had a good conference, I thought. Good to get back after COVID. And we'll be in New Jersey in a couple of weeks. So those of you in the New York, New Jersey region, stay tuned. We'll be presenting some programming, live programming between now and the end of the year. Our guest speaker is Lance Einstein. Lance is a tax partner and a co-managing partner of a firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. And we started kicking around the idea of employee retention tax credits. The issue surfaced in our listserv, and we thought it was worthy of a webinar. And we've got about 85 or so managing partners registered for today. So welcome, everyone. We'll begin at the top of the hour. So how was the trip back home, Uri?
Fantastic, as usual. Sitting in a cramped plane seat never feels good, right?
Good fun. Good fun. I am, for the first time, coming at you from a conference room of a client. Usually I'm at home in my office with multiple screens and a camera and all that fun stuff. But we come to you today from Massachusetts, Amherst, Massachusetts, and I'm in a conference room with a client here. So hopefully we got good, strong Wi-Fi in advance. If we have any problems, Uri will take over the program. But welcome, everyone. We are glad you're here. Lance will be with us shortly, but let's go ahead and get our program underway. Again, welcome, everyone, to the MPF conference webinar for the month of November. We are glad you're here. And there is Lance. Yay! We can see you, Lance. Your mic doesn't seem to be working, but we can see you. So we're making progress. Don't you love technology? So welcome, everyone.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. So we've got Uri Gutfreund here from Ames and Golf, and you all know me, John Remsen, and our 32nd edition of the MPF webinar series. Our topic today is regarding employee retention tax credits. So we're going to have a very interactive program. Lance is going to tell us a little bit about the program, its applicability to law firms, any concerns. We'll answer lots of questions. As usual, we have polling questions built into our program. And when you register, we asked you a handful of questions. Lance, welcome. How are you doing?
Thanks, John. I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. Lance is in Atlanta, Georgia, and we've been working with his firm a little bit on some projects. And so, Lance, thanks so much for doing this for us. Just by way of a few housekeeping announcements before we dive in, we do these programs on the third Wednesday, try to do them on the third Wednesday of the month at 2 o'clock. They're all recorded. We've had some really great topics since COVID hit. They're all on our website. They're all recorded, the handouts, the survey data. So please check that out. And if you've got any input for future topics, we're all ears. Our next leadership conference is in May. We'll be setting up registration soon, our signature event here in Atlanta. So be on the lookout for information about that. Our newsletter comes out on Fridays. Many of you get that. Our website, Zoom calls, all those good things. So we're trying to be that resource for managing partners, law firm leaders, to be more effective in the challenging role that is law firm leadership. So when we got 82 people signed up for today, and we really want to ask your questions. There's a question box. You can type things in. We got our usual audience polling questions, so please feel free to ask your questions of Lance. He's an expert on this topic, working with a couple of dozen law firms on their applications for employment retention credits, and he'll tell you all about it and whether or not it's something your firm should consider. Our next webinar, we're going to try to tuck one in here before the Christmas break on December 21, and Uri and I will do our year-end review and big bold predictions for 2023 program. So first test question, everybody, for your polling. Most of us know how to do this by now, but our first test question, and this is for Lance, is your head count. How many lawyers are at your law firm? And if you would, go ahead and vote. And I like to joke that I'm in Georgia, and guess what? We're going to have another runoff. We just can't get enough vote counting here in Georgia. But Lance, there's our firm size is represented on today's call. Just for your information, we tend to really draw, mid-size firms, and got firms from all over the country on today's call. So thank you everyone for weighing in on that question. We appreciate it.
Share the results, John.
Hey, I got it. So when you're registered, and we asked if you applied for the PPP loan program. Just about everybody on today's call has applied for that. Uri, we did a program on PPP loans back in the day. No surprises there, I don't think.
No surprise at all. And in fact, for those, if you do listen to the recording, you'll hear that was our largest attended webinar since the pandemic started.
It was. And Lance, I assume your firm applied for some PPP loan money?
Yeah, we've had experience with the PPP loan. We've helped businesses and law firms in particular kind of work through some issues with it. So we're familiar with it, very familiar with it as well.
Are you seeing any auditing going on?
For the PPP?
For the PPP. Mm-hmm.
I have not seen any. I have not seen any so far.
Have you seen among the firms you work with any audits of the PPP loans?
No, not at all.
Seems to be just about everybody applied, just about everybody got their forgiveness, and life was good. Lance, this is for you as well, as your firm applied for these employee retention credits, and it looks like 60% of our audience is considering it. And I think your comments today might be very influential as to whether or not they proceed. 5% say they have applied and received their approval, and 1 in 3 say no, we haven't yet applied. So Lance, what are you seeing, generally speaking, law firms as you see most firms going after it, or most firms sort of wait and see? What generally are you seeing among law firms and the appetite for this program?
Well, what I'll tell you is that we've been doing the ERTCs or the ERCs for a long time now, before most people started picking up that it was available. And we have done probably several dozen law firms at this point, amongst other industries, and really the law firms that the focus so far has been on litigation law firms, mostly because they're impacted by the court systems being shut down, limited, jury trials being limited, bench trials being limited. So there has been a focus more on the litigation firms, but we've also worked with workers' comp firms and other various practice areas as well.
Okay. Got a couple other, when people registered, we had them answer a couple of survey questions. And people love this data, as we discussed, the data we generate and the interaction among our speakers. So next question we asked when you registered is your top priority between now and year end. What's your firm working on, and those year end collections? We're budgeting for next year, planning for next year. We're divvying up the profits among partners. We're looking at associate comp and bonuses. We asked folks to pick one priority from that list. Uri, from where you sit, is that about right? Or are firms not paying attention to things they should be paying attention to this time of year?
Nope, this is absolutely, I mean, this is every year people say this. I'm not sure anything's different. Year-end collections, dialing for dollars, that's December dialing. I mean, it's like that every year.
Yep. So yeah, that's I think I'm not surprised to see that. So today's conversation with our friend Lance, we're going to ask Lance to give us an overview of the program, how to assess whether or not it's something your law firm should look at, any other concerns, issues leaders of law firms should be considering as they take a look at this. We'll entertain questions, answers throughout. And if you want to learn more, where to go, we will send a follow-up to everybody with this PowerPoint, the polling results in there. And I've asked Lance to provide some checklists, articles that he thinks might be relevant for today's audience. So with that, let's go ahead and Lance, this is something I kind of picked up. Why don't you give us that kind of 30,000 foot review of this program, what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to start off, why is it that a lot of businesses, law firms included, are just now, this is the hot thing, or this is the thing people are hearing about now? This has been available for a while now, but why is it coming up a lot now, and why haven't a lot of businesses done it at this point, even though it's been available? I think a few reasons. One is originally when this was passed by Congress, they said that if you did the PPP, you couldn't also do the ERTCs. And so I think it put a lot on the back burner. It put the PPP on the front burner and this on the back burner. Well, shortly thereafter, the Congress came out and said, no, you can do both. You just can't use the same wages that you use for PPP forgiveness for ERTC purposes also, or vice versa. You can't use the same wages you use for ERTC purposes for PPP forgiveness purposes as well. So I think that, that really put this on a back seat for a lot of people. Hey, we did the PPP and they just overlooked this because they didn't think they were allowed to. The other reason is there's two ways to qualify. One of which is what a lot of people have looked at so far, and your closest connection to these credits for a long time was probably your CPA, your accountant, et cetera. Well, I think a lot of CPAs and accountants looked at this based on what I like to call the first test. The first test being an objective test. Did you have an applicable decrease in revenue quarter over quarter in Q2 of 2020 through Q3 of 2021 when compared to the same quarter in 2019? And so, CPAs, accountants, they had your numbers and they could analyze it and, hey, you qualify, you don't qualify. And if you don't qualify, nobody thought again about it. So those are some of the reasons I think that this is now only becoming more on the front burner.
So Lance, you gave me a couple of polling questions as to your financial performance. And so you want to go ahead and throw those up and we can sort of see where people are at?
Sure. Yeah, so we can look at that, because that's when we're talking about this first test or this objective test, we are we're looking at 2019 revenue numbers, 2020 revenue numbers, 2021 revenue numbers.
So you asked this first question, how well did your firm perform financially? We might want to provide some definition to that. in
Mm-hmm.
2020 compared to 2019, and then we're going to ask how you compared 2021 to 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go ahead and throw those questions up and define perform financially. What are we looking for? Revenue per lawyer, total firm revenue?
So it's gross receipts or revenue. So we're looking at, for example, we're taking Q2 of 2020 and we're comparing it to Q2 of 19. We're comparing Q2 of 21 to Q2 of 19. And we're looking, so from 19 to 20, in any of the quarters in 20, if there was a decrease of over 50% of revenue or gross receipts, then you qualify based on this objective test. When comparing the same quarter in 2019 to the same quarter in 2021, for really the first 3 quarters, we're looking at a greater than 20% decrease from 2019 to 2021, quarter over quarter. So, and there's a lot of nuanced rules within that, but for today's purposes, I don't think it's necessary to get into that.
Let me, we've got about half of our participating firms so far weighing in on this question. So if you want to vote, go ahead, jump in there. And then Lance, you can tell us what this means, you know, what we'll launch here in a minute. So now we're up to about 75%. I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So the firms that did better don't qualify. Is that fair to say?
They may not qualify based on the first test or the objective test.
Is this surprising you, the data that we just presented here on the screen?
Not necessarily, no.
I think Uri and I, when we were doing polling on the impacts of COVID, you know, firms had some of their best years in 2020 and 2021. COVID, firms generally didn't miss a beat. Let's hide this data, and then I will pull up our next polling question. We'll just look at how you performed in 2020 compared to 2020. What was that, 2020 compared to 2019?
Well, it should be 2021 compared to 2019.
So I missed, there it is. Did I get the question in there right? So everybody, if y'all would answer that. And then
2021 compared to 2019 is what it should say. 2021 compared to 2019.
Okay.
Significantly better, somewhat better, about the same, somewhat worse, or significantly worse. 2021 compared to 2019.
Thank you, Uri. You sound very professional, and you know, you should do more speaking there. So here we got about 75% of our voters in, and here's what they said to that question. So Lance, what do we?
John, you have to share. You have to share.
Hang on. There we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So firms did pretty well.
So yeah. So here's what I will tell you, and I don't know if this is necessarily surprising to me, and I suspect a lot of people are on here because they've already looked at these gross receipts or revenue figures and comparisons, and they don't qualify. I would make an assumption that they don't qualify based on decrease in revenue. So I think the more important probably topic is the second test, which is a subjective test for how do you qualify. I'd be surprised if most people are not on here because they're curious about that and have questions in that regard. So that second test is, was your business at least partially suspended by more than a nominal amount due to government shutdown orders related to COVID. So I'll say it again because it's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
Was your business at least partially shut down by more than a nominal amount due to government shutdown orders related to COVID? So the first thing we're always looking at is, were there government shutdown orders related to COVID? Because that's got to be present. In most jurisdictions, for example, in Georgia, you know, there were shutdown orders in place beginning mid to late March, and for example, in Georgia, shutdown orders lasted through the governor's orders until largely until April 30th of 2021. But then we also look at other orders such as court-ordered shutdowns. The Georgia Supreme Court had shutdown orders. Certain counties had shutdown orders. So there's all different types of orders that we look at to determine whether there was actually an applicable shutdown order. As long as that's there, then we look at, okay, how did that shutdown order at least partially suspend your business operations by more than a nominal amount? The IRS's threshold in their Q&A, it's really a relatively low threshold. They use a 10% kind of threshold to determine whether your business was partially suspended by more than a nominal amount. And so it can be anything from your office was literally shut down and it was due to government shutdown orders and you couldn't operate. It could be you had a significant or I guess more than a nominal amount of employees out because of COVID related orders. It could be, for example, with a lot of law firms, it was you couldn't get in front of a court, you couldn't get in front of a judge. There was no mandated discovery. There was no jury trials. And so a lot of those orders we found went well into 2021. And especially when you're talking about litigation firms, on the plaintiff side, especially, you can't, you lose leverage, not having the ability to have a trial, to force discovery, et cetera. On the defense side, as well, maybe people are more motivated to settle, but on the defense side, you're doing things on an hourly basis, and so you don't have to put in as much work because you can't take cases to trial, and you're having you're having to settle the case, or maybe you're not settling the case because there's no force of or threat of trial.
Lance, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yep.
We've gotten this question like coming through the questions, the pre-questions.
Mm-hmm.
This is the number one question. I think you're saying it, but just to clarify, there's an or in that bullet point. And to
Mm-hmm.
drill down, for firms that were shut down,
Mm-hmm.
litigation firms, other types of firms, they had the shutdown, but they did not suffer economically. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They may qualify anyway, or they may not qualify anyway.
Correct. They may qualify anyways.
Okay.
And Lance, I would think real estate firms, deals are getting postponed. I mean, they would have been disproportionately impacted. Real estate transactional firms.
Well, you gotta look at the government shutdown orders that would have caused that delay. But to Yuri's question, comment, yes, it is an or thing. It is an or thing. So if you did not have a decline in gross receipts,
right,
you can still qualify under this alternative test.
You could even have done well, Lance, correct? You could
Well,
have grown.
and yes, correct. And I look at this, I always look at the numbers. I look at gross receipts. Um, I look at net income. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a tax attorney, so I'm a numbers guy. So I like to just, sometimes they tell a story because sometimes we've seen a lot of situations where gross receipts go up because there was a big investment in workforce, and various other things in 2019 leading into 2020, which naturally generated more revenue or gross receipts, but their net income is down, or the net income isn't necessarily down, but owner's compensation is down, and you basically haven't made as much money through that. Now, some of the other things, I like to think about are, I talked to somebody yesterday, a law firm. Well, you did as good or better in a lot of these quarters in 2021 and 2020 compared to 2019. Tell me about that. And a common theme is when I talk to people is, well, I work twice as much. I worked twice as hard. My people worked twice as hard to make the same amount of money or maybe a little bit more. Um, Another thing that I've seen a lot of is there's trailing decline or trailing issues. So people had cases in the pipeline in 2018, 2019 into 2020 and 21, and they, pushed settlement to generate, money for their clients, fees for themselves, and they pushed these cases in the pipeline already, and maybe the pipeline, in 2020 and 2021 wasn't as, there wasn't as much coming in, and so people are starting to see some effects, due to this in late 2021 into 2022. And so, for example, um, you know, um, uh, somebody said to me, yeah, we had a lot of cases, a lot of auto accidents, and we represented, we have all these cases, and we were able to settle them in 2020 and 2021, but nobody was driving in 2020 and 2021. So we weren't getting as many cases. So now there's not as many cases, for us to settle or to work through, post COVID, knock on wood. So, I like to think of it, people are always trying to justify, well, yeah, my business was partially shut down because of COVID and these government orders, but I didn't really lose any money, or maybe a small amount of money, or I did better. So, but they're trying to justify it, and so, you know, that is not necessarily the way to look at it. You look at it literally. Were your business operations partially suspended by more than a nominal amount due to government related shutdown orders? And so,
Lance, I got a question here too, because the name of it is employee retention. You haven't talked about employee retention layoffs. We're talking about financial performance.
It's
Is it misnamed?
Well, I think the idea is that this is here to help and encourage employers to retain employees, but there's no requirement, similar to the PPP, where if you had 25 employees, when you got the PPP and you got the money and then you fired half of them, so your forgiveness is only half of what you got. There's no requirement, similar to the PPP forgiveness with employee retention. I think it's just the motivation behind it by Congress was, to help businesses retain employees.
You don't have to demonstrate that you retained employees to qualify for this tax credit. Is that
Nope, there's no requirement.
interesting?
And
So-
Lance, and then the question that came as a follow-up from Scott D is that you have to show impact. You don't have to show financial impact. I mean, I'm putting a little words in his mouth to try and nail this down, but you have to show an impact, not a financial impact. Correct?
Well, it can be. I mean, it can be a financial impact, but
Right.
it doesn't have to be. You know, it could be that
That's Scott's question.
your workforce was limited by more than a nominal amount due to government shutdown orders related to COVID. And so normally you'd have, 25 people working, but you only had, 15 people working. You know, a lot of times we'll look at it from the standpoint of, okay, in 2019, I had, cases all across Georgia. I'm going to use Georgia as an example just because that's where I'm located in Atlanta. But, we have cases all over Georgia, but 20% of our cases are in Fulton County, and, 15% are in another metro Atlanta county. And those courts were closed for an extended period of time due to government shutdown orders. The jury trials were limited due to government shutdown orders. So when looking at that, 20% of that law firm's cases were affected. In 20, what would typically be 20% of their cases in Fulton County was affected in 2020 and 2021 because the Fulton County court systems were shut down, in those years. So that's the impact that we're looking at. Maybe you did have your year was just as good, but you had another area of practice did very well, but litigation didn't do as well because of this. Well, if litigation is more than a nominal part of your law practice, then and the courts were shut down and affected that portion of your law practice, then that is applicable here. That's something to look at. So it's not just a financial impact. It can be, there can be varying levels of impact that we look at to make the recommendation whether or not somebody's eligible to, for these credits.
Boy, the language associated with that second test is so loose, Partially, what was it? Partially by more than a nominal amount.
By more than a nominal amount, correct.
Lots of interpretation, isn't it?
It's subjective, for sure. And I'll tell you, now everybody's getting wind of it, and there's companies that are popping up that are advertising, and they're trying to, sell these credits essentially, and they're taking huge percentages, 10, 20%. It's on contingency. So it's like, hey, you get $1 million of credits. When they come in, you pay us $200,000. The IRS is picking up on bad actors who are coming into the market, who are essentially committing fraud. And when I say fraud, what they've said that they've seen and are looking at are companies that are calculating amounts that are don't exist, businesses that don't exist maybe. A caveat is whatever credits you're claiming. For example, if you claim $200,000 of credits in 2020, you have to reduce your wage deduction dollar for dollar by that credit. So, the IRS will pick up on businesses that claim the credit in 2020, for example, for $200,000, but then don't amend their tax return to reduce their wage deduction by the $200,000. So there's these badges of I guess fraud, you would say, where the IRS is, those are the businesses and the companies who are representing the businesses that they're going after. It looks like at this point. And I'll tell you, I've said no to plenty of businesses that have called me. They don't have a significant decline in gross receipts, and they just don't qualify, based on partial suspension of business operations. But I'll tell you, there are a very significant portion that we deem do qualify based on that partial suspension of business operations. To me, it's one of those things where it makes sense to get a good professional to help you determine whether or not you're eligible for this and for how much. It's one of those things where it can't hurt to look into, in my opinion.
Lance, you're ahead of us. Let me, one of our when people registered questions for you. Be sure to discuss third-party scams, which we touched on. Here's another one. Any downside or risks if a firm is not sure, but goes ahead and puts forth its application? Any risk to that?
Well, if it's not fraud and it's in good faith, when we represent somebody, we're not taking these cases on contingency basis. We're doing it hourly. We practice before the IRS. We actually essentially we prepare a memo based on the facts and the law supporting our position if we deem a business to be eligible. So essentially, we're giving a tax opinion, and that a business can rely on. Our basis has to be, we have to have at least a reasonable basis to take a position that you're eligible. So the risk is you could get audited. I have not yet seen an audit, from these, but you can get audited. The IRS could make an adjustment if they disagree with the position. I would say that if there's any penalties involved because of the position, I think, and that's part of what we're doing. We're giving an opinion that there's a reasonable basis to do this, and the taxpayer, the business, can rely on that when making the decision, and if they were audited, to mitigate penalties and that type of thing. So, really the downside is, if you're doing this legitimately, is that you get audited and the IRS disagrees with your position, and they make an adjustment. So I've had some people who let's say they get $1 million back. They get the $1 million back. They put it in the bank, and they're like, I'm not touching this until the statute of limitations runs on the IRS being able to audit this. We get varying levels of business owners, thresholds for risk, and so we try to mitigate it and work with each individual business and person based on their how they perceive things, I guess you could say.
I'm sorry, you wanted to jump in there and I kind of cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The questions are blowing up here, Lance. We got a lot of questions. Let me put like 5 of these together, because I think a few people are dancing around the same question.
Yeah.
So let me finish the questions and then maybe answer them, Lance, anyway makes sense. Number 1, is the process for applying for these credits essentially amending those tax returns 20 and 21, and then And then does it come as a credit? Does it come as an amount? And therefore, is it follow-up, is it taxable? And then the last question, I think, related to that, are there state programs that follow along, or is this purely federal? Take those three.
So I'll answer the easy one first. This is federal.
I almost
this is
answered that one.
federal. Sorry, I kind of started with the last one, but forgot the train of thought.
Sure.
real quick, Gary.
Yeah, no, sure.
Process.
The process, are they
very
amending their
convoluted question,
returns?
Lance. It wasn't your fault.
Are they amending their returns? Is that the process, how this will work?
So the way to claim these credits is through filing a 941X, which is an amended payroll tax return. So the actual amendment is not difficult. It's an amendment. It's about getting the numbers that are supposed to go in the amendment. And just to answer a question that some businesses have, businesses do use a third party. Some businesses use a third party payroll company, a PEO, a professional employer organization, who they outsource their employees essentially. And so with them, they have to actually amend their tax returns, and you just provide them the information for your business that they incorporate into the amendment of their tax returns. But if it's your employees under your employer identification number, then you amend your tax returns. The more, I don't want to, difficult part, time consuming part is the actual calculations, because the maximum credit in 2020 is $5,000 per employee, based on a 50% credit on up to $10,000 of eligible wages. In 2021, that's $7,000 per employee per quarter for each of the first 3 quarters. So you do the math, it's $5,000 for 2020, up to $21,000 in 2021. That's $26,000 up to that. So the credit in 2021 is 70% per quarter of up to $10,000 of wages per employee. So in 2020, you can spread it over the whole year to get to that $10,000 of eligible wages. In 2021, it's per quarter. But the other important thing, and one of the things that do make the calculations a little bit more convoluted, is you cannot overlap wages and use the same wages for ERTC purposes as you use for PPP forgiveness purposes. So usually, if there was a lot of people got the PPP in April of 2020, and then they got it again, or some businesses towards the beginning of 2021. But the IRS originally had an 8-week forgiveness period, and they increased that to a 24-week forgiveness period. So you've got to allocate wages, appropriately, so you're not double counting. So we got it. Most people have already done the PPP forgiveness applications, so we have to make sure that we don't utilize any of those wages that were utilized in PPP forgiveness applications for the ERTCs. So the calculations are not easy if you do them the right way and you do them to maximize the credits. That's where a lot of the time comes in. And I think the last question somebody had is, yes, they're indirectly taxable because you have to reduce your wage deduction on your income tax return dollar for dollar for the credits you claim. So if you claim 200,000 in 2020 on your of these credits, you have to reduce your wage deduction on your income tax return by $200,000. If you claim $500,000 of credits on 2021, you have to reduce your wage deduction on your 2021 income tax return by that amount, which means you have to amend your returns at this point. That's certainly a consideration, but something that I would not suggest you look the other way on if you're going to claim these credits.
Is there a deadline or a point at which this window, the opportunity closes for law firms, any business to apply?
So other than who knows what Congress can do. I mean, I suppose they could change the law, but as of now, it's all based on the statute of limitations on when you can amend your 941s. So for 2020, you can amend them until and claim a refund until April 15th of 2024. And for 2021, you can amend them and claim a refund until April 15th of 2025. So, this at this point, the statute is open for a while longer. It's just one of those things where you just don't know, if something's, I don't foresee it happening, but you never know if something could change.
So if a firm files amends its 941s, is the government pretty quick to turn around and give you an approval on your application or a denial on your application, or is it really?
So that's a good question. Obviously, one of the more important ones I get. So in any quarter, for credits that are applied for, where the total credit in that quarter is less than $200,000, those seem to be processing fairly quickly now. Timelines with the IRS, it's a moving target. So 6 months ago, I would have said, any of these things, you're looking at, at least 6 to 12 months. And then, a few months ago, I started saying you're looking at 3 to 6 months. Well, now, if you're claiming credits for under $200,000 in any quarter, a lot of them are starting to process in 2 to 3 months, and people are getting checks back in the mail in 2 to 3 months. For those credits in any quarter that are, if it's over $200,000, those are taking a little bit longer because, I don't know definitively that 200,000 is the number, but just from experience and doing this as many times as we have at this point, it seems like 200,000 is the number, and those go through a second level of review. And those are taking, it's hard to put a number on it, but I would say at least, 6 months, probably up to 12 months. And there's outliers, of course, some could take a little shorter than that. Some could even take longer than that. But that's what we're finding. So sometimes, people will have, some of their quarters have under 200,000 and some have over 200,000, and the ones under process, and then they have to wait on the over 200,000. But we haven't had any rejected at this point.
I was going to ask you if denials.
No, we've been doing this for, I don't know when we first started, but it's been a year or two now. We started early on before it kind of got out, because we picked up on, this is a legitimate thing that's available. And so we've done dozens of them, at this point, and we haven't had any rejected. We haven't had any audited. We have some obviously in process right now, but I think, I would say that these are not going to get audited. I think at some point, at least for the ones that these badges of fraud are present, I would think the IRS is going to do something about it and punish, the bad actors. But at this point, I haven't seen any rejected. I haven't seen any audits.
Lance, we got, I mean, you've made your method clear, but we've got a few questions, and maybe you can just clarify this and opine on this, which is clearly a bunch of the law firms have been approached on a contingency basis, where entities, maybe law firm, maybe not law firms, are soliciting firms to do it on some type of a contingency. You shared you do it hourly. Walk us through. Does it ever make sense to do contingency? What do you think?
Well, at this point, I haven't seen any rejected. So it seems so. Here's my take on it, and I'll talk a little bit from. I'm a tax attorney. We're a law firm. We feel like we have certain rules of professional obligation. There's before the IRS, there's what's called Circular 230, which is professional rules. As far as the IRS goes, we don't feel like we can take cases on contingency and practice before the IRS, because when you take case on contingency, you're tied to a result for your fee. So we've done it by the hour, here's my opinion is we are the best. We're the best thing going when it comes to, having help with these things, because we know what we're doing, and we do it by the hour, and our fees end up being significantly less in almost every instance than if you do it on contingency fee. So I guess the one downside is, if not doing it on contingency fee, is you don't have to pay it until it comes in, which you kind of have to if you're getting $5 million of credits and the fee's $1 million, you probably need the $5 million to pay the $1 million. In our case, our fee for something like that might be $25,000, $35,000, and it's due when we complete the calculations and file the amended returns and do our work. So most people, if not everybody, can just, hey, you got to, we're eligible for $5 million, and your bill's going to be, $30,000. Like, okay, sounds good. So, to me, it's hard when I hear these companies who don't have the sophistication, who are just, checking the box, saying, yeah, go ahead and do it. And then they're taking, I was with somebody last weekend, and they had a business that struggled, and they needed the money. And they got about $500,000 or $600,000 back. And he said the fee was 15%. So if you do the math, the fee was like $85,000. I'm like, man, I wish I would have talked to you, before you did it. Cause for that, for the amount of employees you had and whatnot, our fee probably would have been about $10,000, and so he's like, geez, man, so it pains me a little bit. When people, when I know that this can be done for, a lot less, and you're getting better representation, that's happening.
And Lance, you've talked about Georgia specifically, but this is federal, so
Mhm.
doing stuff all over the country, helping
Yeah.
law firms.
All over the country.
They decide to proceed.
Yeah, we've represented people as far west as Oregon, as far north as like New York, Florida, all across the country. So the only thing different about each jurisdiction is, typically the more conservative states have a less government shutdown orders, or shorter period of government shutdown orders, and the more liberal states have a longer, longer government shutdown orders.
Interesting. Is there anything, we're starting to run out of time here, about 5 or so minutes left. Is there any other guidance you might offer folks listening in on our call as they're taking a look at this that we haven't already?
I don't think so. I think we've covered just about everything. Yeah, we've covered just about everything.
I've asked Lance to dig up some resources that we will put into the handouts, that we send everybody coming out of this. So there'll be more there. And, I got to think firms are going to be taking advantage of this as they learn more and feel more comfortable that there's not that much risk or downside. Nobody wants to get audited, of course, but, that seems to be the only substantive risk here.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just tell you very quickly our process, because I try to make it as painless as possible. And, I don't want people wasting their time. I don't want to waste my time. I typically have an initial call with somebody just to get an idea of, the business, what we're dealing with, the amount of employees. Usually takes about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. If I think that it's a possibility, I get a little bit of information, like I get P&L, quarterly P&Ls, copies of the 941s. I just want to see, what the numbers look like, what's there. Does it make sense, to move forward? Because if you only have 2 or 3 employees and you only qualify for, 2020, it might not be worth, moving forward. So it's kind of like an initial call of about 10 minutes. And then we get some information if we think it's a possibility, have another follow-up call for about 15 or 30 minutes, talk through things, how your business was affected if you don't qualify based on decrease in revenue. And I found, for me, it's more trouble than it's worth to be engaged, at that point. So, I mean, I'll spend 30, 45 minutes just kind of figuring out if this is a possibility, and if it's realistic that, the business can move forward. And with, 30 minutes, an hour, and I'm like, no, like it's not a good fit, or yeah, I think this is something, that you should take advantage of. And so I don't charge, I don't charge for that, or
I bet you're going to get some calls.
I mean, it doesn't make sense for me. It'd take me more time to set up a file than it would for me to figure out whether this is a realistic possibility. So I found that it works for me, it works for us, kind of that process. And I'm not, we're doing it, as a, we're doing it just like we do any other case. We're charging fees similar to every other case. We don't look at like, we're not going to, make $100 million off of this thing like some of these companies out there. It's it's good business, but it's, we're also helping a lot of businesses, that law firms included, that could really use the money.
We're going to provide Lance's contact information as we close things down here. And this is a great question we wanted to throw out to our audience today. And that's your plans for rate increases for next year. Are you planning them, blended hourly rate increases in 2023? We asked this question in New York, Uri, last week among our crowd. And let me pull it up and ask people, because this will give you go to your partners, and let's do it. Here's what other firms are doing. So what are you doing with rate increases next year, if any? And if y'all would go ahead and answer this question, are you planning rate increases in 2023? Yes, by a lot, varying degrees of increase, or no, or we're still thinking about it. And Lance, I'm going to ask you to predict before we do our reveal where you think most firms are going with their rates next year.
I'm going to go with I'm going to go with by 10% or more for average timekeeper.
Wow.
And
Uri,
I
what do
mean,
you
I think
predict?
sorry, go ahead, Uri.
Yes, raise a little less, 5 to 9.
We've
5 to
got
9.
this is our most heavily voted question, and here's what we got in terms of where firms are going for rates in 2023. So be bold, be aggressive. It's time. Lance, thank you so much for joining us and trying to make sense of this ERTC program. And I wasn't sure to call it the ERC program or the ERTC program because I saw both out there.
Yeah, people call it
John,
both.
close the poll. Close the poll, John.
But hang on, Uri. People want to take that in and take pictures of it, and we'll send the results of it once we leave the call today. So, Uri, what say you about rate increases? New York, people are going after it, bumping the rates pretty substantially.
Now is the time. Now is the time. Many had not done it the last 2 years.
You guys kicking them up?
My?
Yeah, your firm.
I'm going to kick them up like 100% on the ERTCs.
Well, everybody,
yeah,
thanks again for being with us. Lance, thank you for sharing your knowledge and helping us decipher this program and seeing if it makes sense for our law firms. Uri, good to see you as always. And we'll be doing our follow-up probably not till early next week, only because I'm kind of at capacity this week, but we'll certainly round up and send the follow-up to everybody with all this polling data. And Lance, anything you want to say to take us home?
I'd just like to say thanks for having me, John. Uri, I appreciate it. And I'm here to help answer any questions and help any law firms or other businesses that need help with this. So happy to help.
Lance, thank you again, and happy holidays to you and your family. Uri, anything you would like to say before we end our call this afternoon?
Last point. If your firm qualifies, do it. It's legal. Qualify. Do it.
Uri, there was one question we didn't talk about. Is there insurance coverage for this?
Well, let me qualify the question and then maybe ask Lance if he's had any experience on this. For PPP, which is a comparable credit, funds back from the government, some firms purchased a special insurance policy, basically backing up the opinion, in your instance, like you were saying, a tax opinion, backing up the opinion, should it get rescinded at a later time, they bought insurance so that they didn't have to chase after their old partners that they already distributed the funds to, and they had an insurance policy to cover it. So that's how we did it on PPP. One of our registrants had asked if you're aware of any insurance for this, same, I guess, insuring the tax opinion.
I haven't had anybody do that, but listen, there's insurance for almost everything, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's not already happening, that it doesn't.
Uri, you getting that request? You're brokering insurance for law firms. You getting any questions on this?
I actually have not, but it's insuring the tax opinion. I mean, this tax opinion insurance has been around forever, and that's how we did it on PPP. So I suppose we could, but no, I haven't seen it yet.
I think you got a new line of business here, perhaps a new product.
Thanks, John.
But anyway, everybody, thanks so much. Have a good Thanksgiving. We'll see you next month. And reach out to Lance or to Uri or to myself if you have any questions, any follow-up. And Lance, thank you again for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.